I am Liam, 32 years old. For years after my own family completely erased me from their lives, treating me like I never even existed, they walked right into the middle of my restaurant uninvited and demanded 15% of everything I had built. While I was working 3 backbreaking jobs just to survive and fighting off daily panic attacks, my parents said, "Your brother needs this more than you do, Liam. You are just being incredibly selfish." They actually laughed at my desperation right there in our living room. But there is one thing they didn't know. The secret weapon I had sitting right in my pocket. I had already bought my brother's debt, and I held the legal rights to everything he owned. And now they are the ones begging. Before I tell you exactly what happened and how I took everything back, hit that like button if you truly believe in justice. And don't forget to let me know where you are watching from down in the comments section. Now let's go back to where it all started. It was a Tuesday evening, right around 6:45 in the evening. The dinner rush was just starting to hum at the Ironwood. I had built this place from the absolute ground up, pouring every ounce of my soul, my sweat, and my sanity into its foundation. Every single reclaimed would beam on the ceiling, every custom brass light fixture, every item on the locally sourced menu was a piece of my identity. I knew the exact sound the heavy kitchen doors made when they swung open. I knew the exact smell of charred rosemary, roasted garlic, and rendered Wagyu fat that drifted through the air. I had spent 4 years curating the playlist that was currently filtering softly through the hidden speakers, designed to make every guest feel like they had stepped into an exclusive sanctuary. This was my sanctuary. This was the only place in the entire world where I felt entirely in control, safe from the chaos that had defined my early 20s. I was standing at the stainless steel prep counter, meticulously checking the plating on a pan-seared sea base order. I was wiping a microscopic smudge of sauce off the rim of the porcelain plate when my floor manager, Sarah, pushed through the double doors. Sarah usually had this unshakable, deeply rooted calm about her. She had handled drunken local politicians, arrogant food critics with chips on their shoulders, and broken water pipes on a fully booked Valentine's Day without ever losing her composure. But right now, she was clutching her leather-bound clipboard tightly to her chest, and she looked at me like I had just stepped out blindly into moving traffic. She walked quickly over to my station, keeping her voice low so the line cooks wouldn't hear the panic in her tone. "There is a family sitting at table 7, she said carefully, her eyes darting between me and the dining room doors. They walked right past the host stand while I was seating another party. They said they did not need a reservation, and that you would understand." I understood immediately. The words hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. Table 7 was my best table. It was the one right by the floor-to-ceiling window that offered a sweeping, unobstructed view of the city skyline. I felt the blood drain completely from my face, leaving a cold, prickling sensation running down my neck and spine. I had not spoken a single word to any of them in 4 years. I reached up, untied my heavy canvas apron, folded it neatly, and placed it on the counter. My hands were perfectly steady. That was the thing about surviving pure chaos and emotional abuse. Eventually, your body learns exactly how to freeze the panic and switch into survival mode. I walked out of the kitchen, letting the heavy doors swing shut behind me. The low, warm lighting of the dining room washed over me. I navigated through the maze of occupied tables, nodding politely to a few regular customers who waved at me, but my eyes were locked dead onto table 7. My father was sitting there. He was wearing his good navy blazer, the one he usually saved for pretentious country club dinners or aggressive HOA meetings where he loved to complain about the neighbors. He had a glass of my most expensive house Cabernet in front of him. A glass he had absolutely not paid for, poured by a server who assumed my family was meant to be treated like royalty. My mother was sitting beside him. She had her expensive designer reading glasses perched on the very tip of her nose and was mindlessly scrolling through her phone. She was already radiating that familiar, suffocating boredom she always displayed when a situation wasn't entirely centered around her needs. And then there was Julian, my older brother, the undeniable golden child of the family. He was leaning back in his chair, arms crossed tightly over his chest, surveying the dining room like he was the one who held the deed to the property. He wore a crisp dress shirt with the top 2 buttons undone, projecting an air of careless wealth that I knew for a fact he did not possess. My father looked up as I approached. He smiled. It was that terrible, slick, practiced smile that made it seem like no time had passed at all, like we had just seen each other at a warm family gathering the week before. "There he is," my father said, his voice carrying just a little too loudly over the ambient noise of the restaurant, forcing the couple at the next table to glance over. "Look how well you clean up, Liam. I must admit, this place is much nicer than I anticipated." I stopped at the edge of the table. I did not pull out the empty chair. I did not sit down to join them. I needed the physical height advantage. I needed to be the only one standing, projecting authority in my own domain. "You need to leave," I said. My voice was completely flat, devoid of any warmth, welcome, or hesitation. "I have a full house coming in exactly 20 minutes, and this table is reserved for paying customers." "We are not going anywhere," my mother said, not even bothering to look up from her glowing screen. "We drove a very long way to get here, Liam. The absolute least you can do is show some basic respect to your parents and hear us out." "You drove from across the state," I replied, my tone icy. "It is a 2-hour drive on the interstate. You do not get a medal for showing up unannounced and uninvited to my place of business. Don't be smart with your mother," my father snapped, the slick smile vanishing instantly, replaced by the familiar sneer I had grown up fearing. He reached into the inside breast pocket of his navy blazer. He pulled out a thick, folded piece of legal paper and slid it across the white tablecloth. It stopped right near my hands. I didn't touch it. I just stared at the stark white paper against the pristine tablecloth. "Your brother needs a little help right now," my father continued, leaning forward and lowering his voice into a conspiratorial whisper. "We had a lawyer draw this up this morning in Dallas. It is completely clean and standard. You sign this document tonight, right now. Julian gets a 15% silent partnership stake in this little restaurant of yours, and we are done. No drama. No messy family arguments. It guarantees him a monthly salary draw, and it gives him the collateral he desperately needs for his own business ventures." I stared at the folded paper. I could see the watermark of an expensive downtown law firm through the back of the page. "You had a lawyer draft a legal document giving my brother a stake in the business I built with my own 2 hands, and then you drove 2 hours to ambush me during dinner service to demand I sign it." The sheer entitlement was staggering. "We knew you would not pick up the phone if we called," Julian chimed in, smirking up at me. "You always were stubborn." "There is a very good reason for that, Julian," I said, looking right into his eyes until his smirk faltered and he looked away toward the window. "Liam, please," my mother sighed heavily. She finally set her phone down on the table and shifted seamlessly into her favorite character, the weary, reasonable, long-suffering matriarch. "Your brother has made some silly mistakes recently. The market is tough. He is just trying to get back on his feet. Look around you, darling. You have all of this. You have this beautiful room, these loyal employees, the success, the money. Julian has absolutely nothing right now. Does that really feel right to you? Does keeping everything for yourself while your own flesh and blood struggles feel like family?" That word hit the air between us like a heavy rock thrown against a pane of glass. Family. "I need to get back to my kitchen," I said, keeping my breathing perfectly even, refusing to give them the reaction they wanted. "I will have Sarah bring you the check for the wine you are currently drinking, and then you are going to walk out the front door quietly." My father leaned back, his eyes narrowing into cold slits. The mask was fully off now. "You owe this family, Liam. I really do not want to make this ugly, but I absolutely will. Do you want me to start making some phone calls? I know exactly who owns this building. Thomas Sterling holds your commercial real estate lease. Thomas and I go way back. We used to golf together at the club. One phone call from me, explaining exactly what kind of ungrateful, deceitful son is running a business on his property, and I can make your life very, very complicated. I can have your lease revoked before the end of the month, and you will be out on the street with nothing." I looked at the three of them sitting at my table, drinking my wine, threatening to destroy my life. The sheer audacity of the threat hung in the air, thick and toxic. I thought the worst was over years ago. I thought I had escaped them. I was so incredibly wrong. To truly understand the absolute insanity of what was happening at Table 7, and why my father's threat carried such a sickening weight, you have to understand exactly what happened 13 years ago. When I was 19 years old, I wasn't thinking about Michelin stars, curated menus, or commercial real estate leases. I was just trying to survive day by day. I was working 3 separate, grueling jobs. I washed dishes at a greasy local diner from 5 in the morning until noon, my hands constantly raw and smelling of industrial soap. I bussed tables at a massive corporate steakhouse in the evenings, smiling until my jaw ached for minimum wage and a fraction of the server's tips. And on weekends, I did heavy landscaping in the blistering summer heat, hauling bags of mulch and digging trenches. I was saving every single penny I earned for culinary school tuition because I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that my parents would never contribute a single dime to my education. All the money, all the resources, all the praise, and any potential college fund was securely locked away for Julian. Julian was the undeniable golden child. He was 3 years older than me, handsome, incredibly charismatic, and completely allergic to hard work. While I was scrubbing baked-on grease off heavy sheet pans, Julian was pitching his third revolutionary tech startup, entirely funded by my parents' retirement savings and whatever else they could leverage. One sweltering Tuesday afternoon, during a rare 2-hour break between my diner shift and my steakhouse shift, I went to the local bank branch. I needed to open a new checking account to separate my hard-earned tuition savings from my daily living expenses so I wouldn't accidentally spend a single cent of it. The bank teller, a sweet older woman named Martha who always gave me hard candies, took my ID and ran my social security number through her system. I stood there, wiping sweat from my forehead, thinking about the upcoming shift. Suddenly, Martha frowned. She started typing furiously on her keyboard, her brow furrowing deeper. "Liam, honey," she said gently, her voice laced with deep concern. She printed a sheet of paper and slid it across the counter. "I can't open a new line of credit or a new account for you today. And I need to warn you about your credit score right now. You have a massive outstanding default." I stared at the paper. It was a comprehensive credit report. Right there, glaring at me in stark black ink under my name and social security number, was a commercial business loan. $32,000. It was completely maxed out, deeply in arrears with months of missed payments, accumulating astronomical interest, and it had utterly destroyed my credit score. It was sitting at a dismal 410. I felt the entire lobby of the bank spin around me. $32,000. To a 19-year-old washing dishes for minimum wage, that wasn't just a number. It was a life sentence. It was an impossible mountain. I didn't even go to my evening shift. I drove straight to my parents' house in my beat-up sedan. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned completely white, my heart hammering against my ribs. I practically burst through the front door. My parents were sitting comfortably in the air-conditioned living room, watching a game show on their massive television. Julian was upstairs, music thumping through the floorboards. I threw the crumpled credit report onto the glass coffee table, right over my father's golf magazines. "What is this?" I demanded, my voice shaking so violently I barely recognized it. "Someone stole my identity. Someone took out a $32,000 commercial loan in my name." My father calmly picked up the remote and muted the television. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look horrified for his son. He didn't jump up to call the police. He just looked supremely annoyed that I had interrupted his evening. "Calm down, Liam. You're being hysterical," my father said, adjusting his reading glasses and glancing briefly at the paper. "Nobody stole your identity. I took out that loan." I stopped breathing for a full 3 seconds. The silence in the room was deafening. "You what? How? That's federal fraud. You used my social security number without my permission. We needed liquid cash immediately." My mother chimed in from the sofa, her voice dripping with extreme condescension. as if she were explaining basic math to a slow toddler. Julian's startup was at a crucial phase. He needed seed money to secure a server farm, and our credit was temporarily tied up in the mortgage and the car payments. You weren't using your credit for anything important anyway, Liam. You just wash dishes. You don't need a pristine credit score right now. You ruined my life, I yelled, the profound betrayal cutting so deep it felt entirely physical, like a knife twisting in my gut. I can't get an apartment. I can't get student loans for culinary school. I can't even get a decent cell phone plan. I'm going straight to the police. I have to report this as identity fraud to clear my name. My father stood up. He was a large man, and he used his physical size to intimidate. He walked over to me, towering over me, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. You will do no such thing. You live under my roof. You eat the food I buy with my hard-earned money. You owe us for raising you and keeping a roof over your head for 19 years. If you go to the police and report your own family, you will be completely dead to us. Julian needs this capital more than you need culinary school. You're just being selfish and short-sighted. They laughed at my panic. My mother literally rolled her eyes at my tears of frustration. I realized right then, standing in that stifling suburban living room, looking at the people who were supposed to protect me, that I wasn't a son to them. I was a resource. I was a disposable financial asset to be drained completely for Julian's benefit. I didn't go to the police. I was 19, terrified, completely financially dependent on them for housing, and emotionally beaten down to dust. Instead, I packed a single canvas duffel bag that very night, threw my meager belongings into my car, and drove away. I never asked them for another thing. Not $1, not a favor, not a phone call. For the next 4 years, my life was a relentless, grueling nightmare. I didn't just have to save for my own future from scratch. I had to dig myself out of a $32,000 grave that I didn't dig, while fighting off compounding interest. I rented a tiny, unheated studio apartment above a noisy 24-hour laundromat. I slept on a thin foam mattress directly on the floor. I ate leftover white rice and discarded, bruised vegetables from the kitchens I worked in. Every extra shift I begged for, every major holiday I worked while others celebrated with their families. Every single tip I earned went straight to paying down that fraudulent debt. Took me 4 agonizing years to clear it. By the time I was 23, the debt was finally gone, but so was my youth. The trauma of that betrayal forged me into something cold, calculating, and unbreakable. I channeled every ounce of that boiling anger into my culinary craft. I worked my way up aggressively from line cook to sous chef, and eventually, I found private investors who believed in my fierce vision and relentless work ethic. I opened the Ironwood. When the Ironwood won the city's prestigious Best New Restaurant award 2 years running, I stood on a brightly lit stage holding a heavy glass plaque, listening to the thunderous applause of the city's elite. My loyal staff cheered from the front row. But there was no congratulatory phone call from my parents. There was no text message from Julian. Not a single word of pride or acknowledgement. They had erased me, and honestly, I was fine with that. I had made my peace with the profound silence. But then, just 1 month before they showed up at table 7, something incredibly strange and deeply unsettling happened. The silence broke, not with a warm greeting, but with a calculated betrayal from within my own walls. I had a sous chef named David. David was talented, but he had a severe sports gambling problem and a nasty, festering streak of jealousy regarding my rapid promotion and success in the local culinary scene. I caught him stealing premium inventory late one night, expensive white truffles, imported Spanish saffron, and premium cuts of A5 Wagyu. I fired him on the spot, stripped him of his keys, and escorted him out the back door. 2 days after I fired him, Sarah, my trusted manager, found an email browser left open on the shared office computer David frequently used to check inventory. She called me into the office, her face pale. It was a long email thread between David and an external email address I immediately recognized with a jolt of disgust. It was my Aunt Clara, my mother's older sister, Clara had always been the family gossip, the primary scout and spy for my mother's manipulative social campaigns. The contents of the emails were absolutely sickening. Clara had offered David a significant amount of cash, $5,000, to act as an informant. In exchange, David had sent her detailed PDF attachments of the Ironwood's highly confidential internal financial reports. He sent our daily revenue spreadsheets, our exact profit margins, my personal salary draw, the balance of my business accounts, and even the specific terms of my commercial real estate lease. Everything was laid bare. "They know exactly how much money you are making," Sarah had said softly, looking at the glowing screen in horror. "They know everything about the business." I felt a cold, dark rage settle deep in the pit of my stomach. They hadn't just stumbled back into my life out of nowhere. They had actively surveilled me. They had bought my private financial data from a disgruntled, greedy employee. They had seen the massive numbers, realized the outcast son they had abused was now sitting on a literal gold mine, and they had started circling like starving vultures. I knew they were coming. I just didn't know exactly when, or what manipulative angle they would play to try and force their way into my pockets. Now, looking at the legal demand for 15% of my life's work sitting on table 7, I realized the absolute depth of their greed. But the real storm, the true reason for their sudden desperate appearance, hadn't even made landfall yet. The week leading up to their surprise ambush at table 7 had already been a relentless nightmare. The high-end restaurant business is inherently brutal, and massive success always paints a massive, glowing target right on your back. Directly across the street from the Ironwood was a massive, heavily funded, incredibly pretentious restaurant called the Sovereign, run by an arrogant man named Chef Victor. Victor came from extreme old money, was deeply connected in the city's political circles, and was absolutely furious that a self-taught kid who used to wash dishes was stealing his elite, high-paying clientele. Victor had recently started a relentless, coordinated smear campaign against me. Suddenly, aggressive health inspectors were showing up completely unannounced during our busiest Friday night dinner services, citing vague, anonymous complaints about food handling that were entirely fabricated. Local, highly followed food blogs started running mysteriously sponsored negative posts questioning our farm-to-table sourcing, heavily implying we were serving frozen goods. Victor even cornered me in the dark alley by the dumpsters one rainy night, smoking a thick Cuban cigar, flanked by 2 of his massive prep cooks. He offered to buy my restaurant for absolute pennies on the dollar, claiming he was doing it to save me from inevitable bankruptcy. I was spending half my days meticulously cooking and the other half fighting a vicious PR war just to keep my reputation intact. I was exhausted, running on pure adrenaline, sleeping maybe 3 hours a night on the small, uncomfortable leather sofa in my cramped office. The pressure was compounding exponentially, specifically designed to break me down mentally and force a sale. And then, just 3 days before my family finally showed up at my door, my cell phone rang at 2 a.m. I didn't recognize the Dallas area code, but something deep in my gut told me I needed to answer it. "Hello," I rasped, rubbing my burning eyes and sitting up on the office sofa. "Liam? Is that you?" The voice was incredibly shaky, choked with heavy, gasping tears. It took me a few seconds to place the pitch. It was Chloe, Julian's fiancée. Well, former fiancée. I had only met her twice years ago, before I cut ties with the family. She was a sweet, somewhat naive girl from a very wealthy, highly respected family in Dallas. "Chloe? What's going on? Are you okay? It's 2 in the morning." She completely broke down, sobbing into the receiver. It took her 5 agonizing minutes to form a complete, coherent sentence. "He took everything, Liam. Julian took absolutely everything." I sat up entirely straight in the dark office, suddenly wide awake, the exhaustion vanishing instantly. "What do you mean he took everything? What did Julian do?" "He told my father he had this incredible, exclusive real estate development deal. He promised massive, guaranteed returns within 6 months. My dad completely trusted him because he was going to be my husband. My dad pulled massive funds from his 401k retirement account. He heavily leveraged my younger sister's college fund, He even took out a second mortgage on their vacation home. $200,000. Liam. He gave Julian $200,000 in cash transfers. I closed my eyes, pressing my fingers to my temples. And the real estate deal? There was no deal. Chloe screamed through the phone, her voice cracking with raw devastation. It was a complete Ponzi scheme. Julian used my family's money to pay off his own massive, illegal gambling debts and an old, shady business loan that was violently defaulting. When my dad found out the truth last week and aggressively confronted him with the bank statements, Julian vanished. He packed his bags and ran. He broke off our 2-year engagement over a cowardly text message. My dad is losing his mind. He has retained a massive corporate lawyer in Dallas. They are preparing a massive lawsuit right now. A criminal lawsuit for wire fraud, grand theft, and embezzlement. If Julian doesn't return the full $200,000 by the end of the month, my dad is going straight to the district attorney. Julian is going to federal prison. I sat perfectly still in the absolute silence of my office, the low hum of the walk-in refrigerators the only sound in the entire building. My brother wasn't just a failure. He wasn't just a golden child who couldn't launch. He was a hardened criminal. He had systematically defrauded a kind family that entirely trusted him, just like my father had defrauded me 13 years ago. The pattern of destruction was identical, only the stakes were incredibly higher now. Chloe, I am so incredibly sorry, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously calm whisper. I haven't spoken to Julian or my parents in 4 years. I have no idea where he is hiding. I know, she sniffled, blowing her nose. I thought you should know the truth. Because your parents called my dad yesterday. They were screaming on the phone, hysterically begging for more time. They told my dad they were going to get the money to pay him back. They explicitly said they had a foolproof plan to secure a massive new asset that generates high monthly cash flow. A new asset. When I slowly hung up the phone, every single piece of the puzzle slammed violently into place. My parents weren't coming to me because they finally realized they missed their youngest son. They weren't coming because they wanted to reconnect, or apologize, or heal old wounds. They weren't even coming because Julian just needed a little temporary career boost. They were coming to brutally extort me to keep their precious golden boy out of a federal penitentiary. They wanted to violently bleed my successful restaurant dry, using my hard-earned profits to pay off the $200,000 he stole from an innocent family. Now, standing right here at table 7, looking down at the incredibly smug, entitled faces of the people who shared my DNA, I felt a kind of crystalline clarity I had never experienced before in my entire life. All the lingering anxiety, all the deeply ingrained childhood guilt, all the fear of my father's booming voice, it just completely evaporated into thin air. You owe this family, my father repeated loudly, pulling my focus sharply back to the present moment. Thomas Sterling will pull your lease the second I tell him you're a liability. You will lose everything you've built here. Is it really worth losing your entire life's work over 15%? Sign the paper, Liam. Help your brother out of a jam. My mother reached across the white tablecloth, attempting to place her manicured hand affectionately over mine. I pulled my hand back so sharply I almost knocked over a water glass. She sighed dramatically, playing the wounded victim perfectly for the surrounding tables to see. You were always the incredibly strong one, Liam, she said, her voice dripping with toxic, artificial sweetness. Julian doesn't have your intense discipline. We always knew you could handle things entirely on your own. That's why we had to focus all our attention on him. You survived just fine, didn't you? Look at this place. Now, your brother desperately needs you to be the strong one just one more time. Be the bigger person. I looked at Julian. He was swirling his stolen $1,000 wine, not even having the basic courage to look me directly in the eye. He was a coward, a thief hiding behind his mother's skirt. Give me exactly 1 hour, I said. My voice was completely flat, devoid of any emotion whatsoever. I have to get through the main dinner rush to ensure my kitchen doesn't crash. Sit right here. Finish your wine. I will come back to this table at the end of service, and we will handle this paperwork. My father smiled broadly, a triumphant, greasy smile. He thought he had completely won. He honestly thought his petty threat about my real estate lease had broken my spirit. "We aren't going anywhere, son. Take your time." I turned firmly on my heel and walked away from table 7. I did not go back to the hot, loud kitchen. I walked straight down the dimly lit hallway, past the luxury restrooms, and let myself into my private, soundproofed office. I locked the heavy oak door firmly behind me. I wasn't running away to cry. I wasn't panicking. I was going to absolute war, and I was going to annihilate them. The absolute moment the heavy oak office door clicked shut and the deadbolt slid into place, the air in the small room felt incredibly electrified. I didn't pace the floor. I didn't hyperventilate or let the panic take over. I walked straight to my large mahogany desk, picked up my encrypted smartphone, and immediately dialed Marcus. Marcus was a highly respected, ruthlessly brilliant 60-year-old corporate attorney in the city. More importantly, he used to be my family's next-door neighbor when I was growing up in the suburbs. He knew exactly what kind of manipulative monster my father truly was, and he had been my fierce legal mentor and surrogate father figure since the very day I opened a humble food truck 5 years ago. He answered on the second ring, his voice gruff but warm. "Liam, it's Tuesday night. You're usually wrist-deep in white truffle oil at this hour. What's wrong?" "They're here," I said, my voice low, rapid, and incredibly urgent. "Table 7. Right now. My father, my mother, and Julian. They brought a drafted legal contract from a Dallas firm. They want 15% of the LLC as a silent partnership. Dad is aggressively threatening to call Thomas Sterling and have my commercial lease pulled if I don't sign it immediately." There was a brief, stunned pause on the line. Then, Marcus let out a dry, raspy, genuinely amused chuckle. "Your father threatened to call Thomas Sterling?" "Yes. He proudly claimed they used to golf together at the club and that he has immense influence over him. They golfed together exactly twice, over 15 years ago, and Thomas absolutely hates his guts because your father blatantly cheated on the scorecard on the 18th hole," Marcus said, his voice hardening instantly into his terrifying courtroom tone. "Thomas and I have expensive cigars and scotch every third Thursday. Thomas immensely respects you, Liam. He thinks you're the hardest working kid in the city. Your father has absolute zero leverage there. None. But we aren't going to tell him that." "I don't just want to kick them out of my restaurant, Marcus," I said, gripping the edge of my desk so hard the wood bit into my palms. "If I just call the cops and kick them out for trespassing, they will just keep coming back. They are desperate. They will aggressively sabotage my vendors. They will endlessly harass my staff. I want to end this. Tonight. Forever. I need to entirely flip the script and trap them." "I'm listening closely," Marcus said, the sound of his leather desk chair squeaking as he sat up. "Julian's former fiancée, Chloe, called me in tears. Julian owes her father $200,000 for a massive, fraudulent real estate deal. That's exactly why they want the equity in the Ironwood. They desperately need the verifiable cash flow to keep Julian out of federal prison for wire fraud." I paused, taking a deep breath, formulating the incredibly dangerous plan that had been brewing in the back of my mind since Chloe's frantic call. "I need you to draft a completely new contract. Immediately. Use the exact same legal language and formatting they brought, but change the fundamental financial structure." I put Marcus on speakerphone, rested the phone on the desk, and dialed Ben, my brilliant personal accountant, on my office landline. Ben picked up instantly, despite the late hour. "Ben, emergency. I need an incredibly deep, immediate asset search on my brother, Julian," I commanded, my voice cold and precise. "Run every public record, tax filing, and property deed right now." I could hear Ben aggressively typing furiously on his mechanical keyboard. "Give me exactly 30 seconds. Checking state databases." "Okay, got it. He doesn't have much liquid cash. His credit score is absolute garbage, obviously, maxed out cards everywhere. But wait, look at this. He has a physical house in Pflugerville. A 3-bedroom property. The deed is fully in his name, free and clear. It looks like your parents panicked and paid off his entire mortgage in full 3 years ago to hide their own cash assets during a severe IRS tax audit. The house has massive positive equity. In this current real estate market, it's probably worth somewhere around $250,000. Perfect, I said, a dangerous smile spreading across my face. Marcus, did you hear every word of that? Loud and clear, Marcus replied. The sound of his own heavy keyboard was clacking rapidly through the speakerphone. Tell me exactly what you want the new contract to say, Liam. They violently want me to sign over 15% equity. I want you to draft a dense legal document that frames this transaction explicitly as a secured business loan from the Ironwood LLC directly to Julian, utilizing that specific property equity as collateral. But I need you to bury the asset guarantee deep in the legal jargon on page 6 or 7. Make it explicitly state that if Julian defaults on any external debt, like say, a $200,000 fraud settlement, my company automatically has a first position, unchallengeable lien on his personal assets, specifically targeting the Pflugerville property, before any other unsecured creditor can touch it. Liam, that is incredibly vicious, Marcus said, and I could hear the absolute, undeniable respect in his voice. It's completely 100% legal, but it requires his physical signature, and it makes you his primary secured creditor. If you do this and he defaults on the Dallas family, you effectively own his house. You can legally foreclose on him and leave him homeless. Draft it, I said coldly, without a single ounce of hesitation. And Marcus, I need one more crucial thing. I need to get my father on a clear, recorded line explicitly confessing to the $32,000 identity theft from 13 years ago. Texas is a one-party consent state, Marcus confirmed instantly, his legal mind working at lightning speed. As long as you are physically part of the conversation, you can record the audio legally without telling them a thing. If you successfully get him to admit he used your social security number without authorization, the statute of limitations for civil financial damages might be tricky to pursue, but the psychological and legal leverage. The leverage is permanent. No judge will ever look favorably on them in any future custody, inheritance, or bankruptcy dispute if you hold a recorded confession of federal fraud. Send the drafted document directly to my office printer in 10 minutes, I said, and hung up both phones simultaneously. I stood alone in my silent office, watching the heavy, commercial laser printer hum to life. 11 incredibly dense pages of complex legal text began sliding rapidly into the output tray. I gathered the warm pages carefully, checked the specific clauses Marcus had brilliantly hidden in the dense paragraphs, stapled them neatly, and placed them inside a sleek, black leather presentation portfolio. I pulled out my smartphone and opened the high-fidelity voice memo app. I tested the microphone by tapping the bottom of the phone twice. The audio wave jumped perfectly on the screen, picked up every sound with crystal clarity. I unlocked my office door, walked out into the busy hallway, and found Sarah waiting nervously near the bustling bar area. Sarah, I said, my voice incredibly steady, projecting absolute authority. I need you to go to the climate-controlled wine cellar. Take our absolute best reserve bottle of the Opus One. Take it directly to table 7. Pour it generously for all 3 of them. Be incredibly overly polite. Tell them I am just finishing up the final legal paperwork with my accountant and I will be right there to sign. Sarah looked at me, her eyes going incredibly wide. The Opus One? Liam, that specific bottle is over $1,000 wholesale. We only have 3 left. I know, I said, calmly adjusting the pristine white cuffs of my tailored chef's coat. It's an investment in their destruction. I need them feeling incredibly victorious. I need them feeling wealthy, arrogant, and completely, utterly relaxed. I stepped back into the shadows of the hallway and watched intently as Sarah approached table 7. She presented the incredibly expensive bottle, uncorked it with practiced, elegant precision, and poured the rich, dark ruby wine into their crystal glasses. My father immediately picked up his glass, aggressively swirling it, taking a deep smell, a look of utter superiority and triumph washing entirely over his face. He leaned over, said something smug to my mother, and they both laughed out loud. Julian eagerly took a massive gulp of the $1,000 wine, already looking flushed and incredibly arrogant. They thought they had won. They thought the terrified, broken 19-year-old boy they had discarded like trash was back firmly under their heavy boot. They thought this restaurant was just another massive inheritance for them to steal and exploit. I took one final, incredibly deep breath, letting the cold, calculating, ruthless energy fill my chest to the brim. I pressed the bright red record button on my phone, slid it face up into the front breast pocket of my chef's coat, where the microphone was completely exposed, and picked up the black leather portfolio containing their absolute ruin. It was finally time to serve the main course. I walked slowly and deliberately out of the shadows of the hallway, the heavy black leather portfolio gripped tightly in my right hand, my smartphone recording every single ambient sound from my front chef's coat pocket. The dining room of the Ironwood was currently operating at absolute peak capacity. The low, sophisticated murmur of wealthy patrons discussing real estate investments, upcoming promotions, and weekend getaways created a thick wall of sound. The clinking of heavy silverware against expensive porcelain rang out like tiny bells. The air was rich with the scent of reduced wine sauces and seared steaks. It was my empire running flawlessly. I navigated the narrow spaces between the tightly packed tables, nodding politely to my regular customers, keeping my face completely composed. But inside, my heart was beating with a slow, powerful, terrifying rhythm. I was a hunter walking slowly toward a trap that had already been sprung. When I reached the edge of table 7, I stood there for a brief moment, simply observing them before making my presence known. Sarah had done her job perfectly. The immensely expensive bottle of Opus 1 reserve wine was sitting empty on the crisp white tablecloth. My father was leaning back heavily in his chair. His face flushed a deep, unhealthy red from the alcohol and his own towering ego. My mother was smiling, a genuine, relaxed smile I had not seen directed at me in over a decade. She looked around the opulent dining room, likely calculating exactly how much a 15% stake in this establishment would yield her in a monthly salary draw. Julian was slumped slightly in his seat, swirling the last few drops of the dark ruby wine in his crystal glass, looking incredibly pleased with himself. They looked like people celebrating a massive, unearned inheritance. They looked like they had already won a massive lawsuit without ever stepping foot inside a courtroom. I took a deep breath, let the coldness wash entirely over my features, and stepped fully into their line of sight. "I appreciate your immense patience," I said, my voice smooth, carefully controlled, and completely devoid of the seething rage bubbling just underneath my skin. I finally pulled out the 4th chair at the table and sat down, joining them for the first time all evening. "Not at all, Liam," my father said expansively, waving his hand in the air like a benevolent king granting an audience to a lowly peasant. "We know how demanding running a little kitchen can be. The wine was acceptable. A bit young, perhaps, but acceptable." I ignored the subtle insult regarding the $1,000 bottle of wine. I placed the black leather portfolio squarely in the center of the table, right next to the flickering ambient candle. I patted my chest pocket once, ensuring the microphone was perfectly unobstructed. "I have been thinking very carefully about everything you said earlier," I began, looking directly at my mother. I softened my eyes, projecting the exact image of the worn-down, deeply tired, compliant son she so desperately wanted me to be. About being the strong one, about family obligations. I let a heavy, dramatic pause sit right there in the middle of the table. I watched my mother's eyes widen slightly with anticipation. "You are absolutely right that I have always handled things entirely by myself," I continued, my voice dropping to a weary whisper. "Maybe my intense independence made it incredibly easy for everyone in this family to simply assume I didn't need anything, that I didn't need a support system, that I didn't need you. But the truth is, running this business alone is incredibly isolating. I don't want to be that angry, isolated person anymore. I don't want to be the one who handles every single crisis entirely alone while my family struggles. My mother's entire expression shifted dramatically. The practiced weariness and the toxic condescension were instantly replaced by something that looked almost exactly like genuine maternal warmth. That was the truly terrifying thing about giving highly manipulative people exactly what they expected to hear. It disarmed them completely and instantly. "Oh, Liam," my mother breathed, reaching across the table again. This time, I forced myself not to pull away. I let her cold, ring-covered hand rest heavily on top of mine. "We always knew you would eventually come around to your senses. You are a good boy. Deep down, you understand that family is the only real wealth we have. So I will gladly help Julian," I said, looking over at my brother, who suddenly sat up straighter, a massive, greedy grin splitting across his flushed face. "But I need to do it correctly. I need to do it by the book. For my own massive legal liability, and for the absolute financial safety of the restaurant." My father narrowed his eyes slightly, the alcohol clouding his usually sharp, predatory instincts. "What exactly do you mean by the book?" The lawyer in Dallas drafted the contract perfectly. "It's a standard silent partnership equity transfer." "I know," I said, keeping my tone light and conversational. "But Texas corporate law requires extremely specific documentation for any massive business transaction or equity transfer over $10,000 where a verbal agreement is made prior to the actual physical signing, especially between immediate family members." That statement was, of course, absolutely fundamentally false. It was complete legal gibberish I had just invented on the spot. But my father did not hold a law degree, and his arrogant brain was too soaked in expensive wine to process the lie. "It is just a boring formality," I added smoothly, gesturing toward my chest. "For my accountant, Ben. He is an absolute stickler for the rules. I have my phone recording this conversation right now. I just need to get the verbal terms on the record before we sign the actual paperwork. It keeps this massive equity transfer completely off my personal tax return and books it cleanly as a corporate business expense. Otherwise, the IRS is going to hit me with a brutal 40% tax liability right out of the gate, and I know neither of us wants to lose that much capital to the government." My father's eyes darted to my chest pocket, then to my face, then back down to the heavy leather folder sitting on the table. I could practically see the rusty gears turning in his head. He was doing the math. Or rather, he was doing what his ego told him was the math. He saw a cautious, previously burned businessman trying to cover his legal bases and avoid a massive tax audit. He saw boring, standard corporate paperwork. He did completely fail to see the incredibly lethal steel jaws of the trap waiting beneath the surface. "Fine," my father said, straightening his navy blazer with the unconscious, arrogant dignity of a man who firmly believes he is the smartest person in the room. "Turn the recording on. Let's get this over with." "It is already recording," I said calmly. "I need you to state clearly for the audio log that this specific transaction is a secured business loan originating from the Ironwood LLC, directed to Julian." I paused, looking at Julian. "What is your exact legal corporate entity right now, Julian? Do you have an active LLC or an S-Corp I should make the transfer to?" Julian shifted uncomfortably in his seat, suddenly looking like a scolded child. It's just me. I don't have an active LLC right now. The Dallas deal was handled personally. Just make it a personal transfer." "Okay," I said, nodding slowly, ensuring the microphone picked up every single syllable. "So, for the record, this is a massive personal loan secured directly against Julian's personal physical assets. I need you to state that clearly for the record, Dad, so my accountant can categorize the risk correctly." My father cleared his throat loudly. "I, Richard Calloway, am formally authorizing this transaction between my son Liam's company and my eldest son, Julian Calloway. The purpose of this transfer is to—" He hesitated, not wanting to admit the truth out loud. "To completely satisfy Julian's overwhelming personal debt to his Dallas investors," I supplied gently, offering him the rope he was eagerly tying around his own neck. while providing him with a monthly salary draw and solid collateral for further negotiation to avoid a massive criminal lawsuit. Right? My father agreed quickly. To satisfy Julian's personal debt. Julian currently has 0 liquid assets at this time to cover the obligation himself. Perfect, I said, my voice remaining incredibly light and offhand. And just so my accountant has the complete, unvarnished historical picture. He is going to meticulously look at the entire history of financial interactions between me and the family. It helps him establish with the IRS that this is the very first formal, documented corporate transaction, and not part of a long, hidden pattern of untaxed gifts. The table suddenly went deathly quiet. The ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to fade completely away. My parents stopped moving. So, I continued, pushing forward relentlessly. I need to briefly mention, just for the absolute official record, that there was a prior, unfortunate incident involving a commercial loan taken entirely in my name without my knowledge when I was 19 years old. Just so my accountant can explicitly document it as a separate, entirely unrelated historical event. My father stared at me, his face suddenly turning pale. You want me to mention that specific incident? On a recorded line? He asked, his voice slow and deeply suspicious. It actually helps me immensely, Dad. I lied with a perfectly straight face. It mathematically proves to the government that the prior transaction 13 years ago was entirely informal and unilateral, which legally means this new transaction tonight, by sharp contrast, is highly structured, deeply consensual, and fully corporate. It legally protects my restaurant from any appearance of messy family financial entanglement. It builds a massive firewall. I leaned forward, looking deeply into his eyes, using the exact same tone he used to manipulate me as a child. It actually works heavily in your favor, Dad. It makes the old, ugly thing go away officially. It closes the book on it forever. I sat back and watched him process the lie. I watched him desperately want to believe it. I watched the moment his natural resistance crumbled, the exact moment his towering ego convinced him that taking the easy path was the smartest strategy. He looked directly at my chest pocket. There was a commercial loan taken in Liam's name approximately 13 years ago, my father said, his voice carrying a strange mix of reluctance and arrogant justification. Approximately $32,000. The funds were used entirely for family purposes, specifically to fund a business venture for Julian. It was handled informally at the time without Liam's prior written consent. He cleared his throat again, a nervous tick. This current transaction tonight is entirely separate and distinct from that past event. Perfect, I said quietly, a massive, invisible weight lifting off my shoulders. I had it. I had the complete, unforced, recorded confession of federal identity theft and wire fraud. Thank you for clearing that up for the books, Dad. I reached forward, opened the black leather portfolio, and slid the dense, 11-page legal document Marcus had drafted directly across the table toward Julian. I placed a heavy, expensive silver pen perfectly parallel to the pages. Sign on the 3 flagged lines, Julian, I instructed smoothly. You sign on the borrower line. Dad and Mom, you both sign at the very bottom as secondary guarantors, just acknowledging the transaction. Julian eagerly picked up the heavy silver pen. He flipped carelessly to the last page. But then, for just a fraction of a second, something resembling actual reading comprehension crossed his flushed face. He paused, frowning slightly. Wait, Julian said, his brow furrowing as he pointed his finger at a dense block of text near the absolute bottom of page 6. What exactly does this specific clause mean? It says, first position asset guarantee and immediate lien trigger. That is just standard, boring boilerplate language for any secured corporate loan. I lied effortlessly, my heart thumping wildly against my ribs. It simply means that if you legally default on the payments, my company has a theoretical claim on your assets before any other unsecured creditor can step in. It is exactly how the commercial banks require the paperwork to be fundamentally structured. But we aren't a commercial bank, Julian argued weakly, his eyes scanning the incredibly dense legal jargon he didn't fully understand. I know we aren't, I said, my voice carrying a hint of practiced impatience. But I have to strictly follow the exact same documentation standards, or my private investors will get incredibly nervous and pull their funding from my restaurant. I have partners to answer to. I paused, looking at my brother with a perfectly crafted expression of gentle reassurance. Julian, listen to me. If you successfully pay this Dallas family back, which we all know you will once you have this equity collateral to show them, none of this dense paperwork matters at all. The lien clause literally never gets triggered. It's entirely protective paperwork. That is all it is. He looked at me for a very long, highly uncomfortable moment. I held his gaze without flinching. I let my eyes soften, projecting the exact image of a supportive younger brother who had finally been worn down to something gentle and compliant. Julian exhaled loudly, uncapped the silver pen, and signed his name violently on the 3 flagged lines. He shoved the document toward my father. My father picked up the pen and signed his name with aggressive, sweeping strokes, not even bothering to read a single word of the 11 pages. My mother took the pen last, signing her elegant, looping signature without looking anywhere else but the dotted line. The silver pen was literally still resting in my mother's hand when my smartphone buzzed aggressively against the table. I picked it up. It was a secure text message from Marcus. Wire transfer cleared successfully. Dallas attorney confirmed receipt of funds. You own the paper. Drop the hammer. I read the text message from Marcus twice, letting the absolute reality of the words sink deep into my bones. The trap was not just set. It had snapped completely shut, crushing everything inside it. The heavy, suffocating chains of the past 13 years shattered in a single, glorious instant. I picked up my smartphone from the table. I deliberately pressed the screen, stopping the audio recording, and saved the file to multiple secure cloud drives simultaneously. The subtle click of the recording app shutting off seemed to echo in the space between us. I need to tell you all something very important, I said, my voice completely changing. The soft, compliant, weary tone vanished entirely. My voice was now cold, sharp, and carried the heavy, unmistakable weight of absolute authority. It was the voice I used when a vendor tried to cheat me, or when a line cook repeatedly compromised the integrity of my kitchen. My father looked up from the table, his slick smile faltering as his predatory instincts finally kicked in, sensing the sudden, violent shift in the atmosphere. What is it, Liam? We signed your accountant's paperwork. Are we done here? The $200,000 you desperately needed to wire to Chloe's father and his aggressive Dallas investors to keep Julian out of a federal penitentiary. I began, enunciating every single syllable with terrifying clarity. I wired that exact amount this afternoon. My mother let out a loud, highly dramatic gasp of relief, pressing her manicured hands tightly to her chest. Oh, Liam, thank God. I knew you would do the right thing. You saved your brother. I did wire the money, I continued, holding up a hand to silence her completely. But I absolutely did not wire it to Julian. And I did not wire it to you. I wired it directly to the senior partner at the corporate law firm representing Chloe's father. I reached across the table, grabbed the black leather portfolio containing their freshly signed documents, and pulled it firmly back to my side of the table. I opened it and stared at Julian's sloppy signature. I bought the debt note, I stated, the words falling onto the table like heavy lead weights. The table went completely, utterly silent. The kind of profound silence that happens right before a massive car crash. I paid his furious investors exactly $120,000 in pure cash, I explained, my voice echoing slightly in the tense air. That is exactly 60 cents on the dollar. They were incredibly happy to take the massive loss and walk away. Julian was already an extreme flight risk and a guaranteed default, and they desperately wanted out of the massive legal headache. Julian stared at me, his flushed face suddenly draining of all color, turning a sickening, ashen gray. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. What exactly does that mean? Julian finally stammered, his voice cracking, sounding like a terrified child. It means that the Dallas investors are completely out of the picture, I said, leaning forward, resting my forearms on the table, invading his space. It means they are dropping the criminal wire fraud lawsuit against you tomorrow morning. But it also means that the $200,000 you stole is still entirely owed. It is just legally owed directly to me. My father practically lunged forward, his hands gripping the edge of the table. You bought his debt? You paid off his investors yourself? Why the hell would you do that without telling us? Because, I said, tapping the freshly signed legal document sitting in the leather portfolio, the legally binding contract you three just eagerly signed, completely unread, confirms that this massive loan is an absolute personal obligation, secured heavily and specifically against Julian's remaining personal assets, explicitly noting that he has absolutely zero liquid means to satisfy the debt. My father's eyes darted frantically down to the legal document, suddenly realizing the horrific magnitude of his arrogant mistake. What assets? Julian doesn't have any assets. Yes, he does, I said, a cold, ruthless smile finally touching my lips. He has a physical 3-bedroom house sitting in Pflugerville. The deed is entirely in his name, free and clear, because you idiotically paid off his mortgage to hide your own money from the IRS 3 years ago. The asset guarantee clause you just signed automatically grants my corporate LLC an immediate, unchallengeable, first position lien on that specific property. If Julian defaults on his payments to me, which he absolutely will because he is a lazy, unemployable fraud, I will legally foreclose on his house. I will take his home, sell it, and recoup my investment. I own him. Completely. My mother let out a shrill, piercing scream of pure horror, finally understanding the catastrophic reality of the situation. People at the surrounding tables stopped eating, turning their heads to stare at the commotion at table 7. You can't possibly do this, my mother shrieked, her face contorted in absolute, ugly panic. Her carefully crafted matriarch persona dissolved completely into dust. Liam, you are a monster. This is your own flesh and blood. Julian is your brother. You are stealing his home. I am not stealing anything, mother, I replied, my voice slicing through her hysterics like a scalpel. I am executing a perfectly legal business transaction that you fully agreed to, heavily subsidized by my own hard-earned cash. He stole $200,000 from an innocent family. He stole their retirement and their college fund. He deserves to lose his house. I turned my absolute focus to my father. He was practically hyperventilating, his chest heaving under his expensive navy blazer. His face had gone from red to a terrifying mottled purple. This is extreme, illegal extortion, my father roared, slamming his heavy fist violently onto the table, making the silverware rattle loudly. I will hire the most expensive corporate lawyers in Texas. I will drag you through the courts. I will call Thomas Sterling right now and have you thrown out onto the street. You are finished, Liam. Finished. I didn't flinch. I didn't back down. I slowly reached into my pocket, pulled out my smartphone, and held it up so the screen was fully visible to him. I showed him the audio file named confession@final.wave. And you, Dad? I said, my voice dropping an octave, resonating with years of suppressed, highly compressed rage. You just explicitly confirmed, on a highly clear, perfectly legal recorded conversation, that you intentionally used my social security number to take out a fraudulent commercial loan in my name without my consent when I was 19 years old. You confessed to federal wire fraud and severe identity theft. My father froze completely, his fist still resting heavily on the table. The violent anger in his eyes was instantly replaced by stark, naked terror. The criminal statute of limitations might have technically expired for the district attorney to throw you in federal prison, I continued, twisting the knife slowly and deliberately. But the civil liability has absolutely not expired, because I just discovered your active confirmation today. More importantly, I am absolutely willing to take this pristine audio recording, hand it directly to the local press, hand it to every single member of your prestigious country club, hand it to the incredibly strict HOA board you desperately want to control, and post it publicly on the internet. I will utterly destroy whatever pathetic, fake legacy you think you have built in this state. You will be a complete social pariah. The table was completely, utterly silent, save for my mother's pathetic, shallow sobbing. The power dynamic had not just shifted. It had been completely obliterated. The arrogant king had been violently dethroned, stripped of his armor, and forced to his knees by the very son he had discarded. I turned my gaze slowly to my brother. Julian was shaking uncontrollably, his hands gripping his knees, staring down at his expensive leather shoes. The profound anger I had fully expected to feel toward him simply wasn't there anymore. What was there was something entirely different. It was something much colder, much quieter, and incredibly permanent. I spent 4 brutal years of my absolute prime youth paying off a massive, crippling debt that I did not take out. I said to him, my voice completely steady, carrying across the silent table. I rebuilt my entire credit score from absolute garbage. I built this highly successful restaurant without a single solitary dollar from any of you. I did it without a single phone call checking on me. I did it without a cosigner. I did it without anyone in this family ever showing up once to see if I was even alive. I paused, looking at my mother, who was hiding her face in her hands. Not once, I repeated, the absolute truth of it ringing out. Not when I successfully signed the commercial lease. Not when I finally opened the doors after months of construction. Not when I won the city's best new restaurant award 2 years running. You treated me like I was dead. I was a walking ghost at my own funeral. I leaned back in my chair, buttoning my chef's coat, establishing my absolute dominance over the space. I honestly would have helped you, Julian, I said, the finality in my voice heavy and absolute. If you had just called me like a normal human being and asked for help, instead of plotting to steal from me, I probably would have given you the money. But you sent spies to my restaurant. You tried to extort my life's work. So now you will pay me back every single penny. You will make monthly payments on a strict schedule my lawyer will send you tomorrow morning. The interest rate is a fixed 3%. That is significantly less than you would ever get anywhere else. If you miss exactly 1 payment by a single day, I will seize the Pflugerville house, evict you, and sell it. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far, you're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. The atmosphere at Table 7 was incredibly toxic, thick with absolute despair and shattered egos. My father was staring blankly at the white tablecloth, his mouth slightly open, the horrific realization of his complete defeat rendering him entirely speechless. My mother was weeping openly now, mascara running down her cheeks. A pathetic display of a highly manipulative woman who had finally run out of victims to control. Julian simply looked broken, staring off into the distance, realizing his life of easy bailouts was permanently over. I am going to ask you to leave my property right now, I said, my voice cutting sharply through the sound of my mother's sobbing. Sarah will bring the final check for the expensive wine you just drank. I highly suggest you pay it. My father suddenly snapped out of his catatonic state. A sudden, vicious burst of desperate adrenaline flooded his system. He stood up so violently his heavy wooden chair crashed backward onto the polished floor. You smug little bastard, he hissed, his voice trembling with unrestrained rage, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. You think you can humiliate me in public? You think you can steal my son's house? I will destroy you. I am calling Thomas Sterling right this second. You are going to lose your lease, you are going to lose this restaurant, and you will be back washing dishes in a greasy diner by next week. He frantically dug his smartphone out of his blazer pocket. His fingers shaking so badly, he dropped it onto the table before snatching it back up. I didn't move a single muscle. I simply reached under the edge of the table and pressed the small, hidden panic button I had installed when I first opened the restaurant. It was a silent alarm connected directly to the local police precinct's non-emergency dispatch. "Call him," I challenged coldly, watching him fumble with his screen. "But you should know that the police are already on their way to escort you off my property for severe trespassing and causing a massive public disturbance." Just as my father pressed the call button and raised the phone to his ear, the heavy oak doors of the restaurant swung open. Officer Davis, a massive, highly respected local cop who frequently took his breaks at the Ironwood, walked in. He immediately spotted the commotion, the overturned chair, and my aggressive father pointing his finger at me. Davis placed his hand resting casually on his utility belt and began walking purposefully toward table 7. "Is there a problem here, Liam?" Officer Davis asked, his deep voice carrying absolute authority, his eyes locked entirely on my father. "These individuals are not paying customers, officer," I said calmly, standing up and straightening my chef's coat. "They are aggressively harassing me and threatening my business. I have repeatedly asked them to leave the premises, and they are refusing." Officer Davis nodded once. He turned to my father, his expression incredibly stern. "Sir, the owner has formally asked you to leave. If you do not exit the building immediately, I will be forced to place you under physical arrest for criminal trespassing. Collect your belongings and walk toward the door." My father lowered his phone slowly, his face turning entirely pale as he looked at the massive police officer. The absolute humiliation of the moment finally broke him. The great Richard Calloway, the arrogant country club member who terrified me for my entire childhood, was being publicly thrown out of a restaurant like a common drunk. My mother scrambled to her feet, grabbing her expensive designer purse, her face hidden behind her hair. Julian didn't say a word. He simply stood up and started walking toward the exit like a zombie. "We drove 2 hours. My mother whimpered pathetically as she passed me, trying one last, incredibly weak attempt at guilt. "There is a cheap motel off the highway," I replied coldly. "Have a safe drive." I watched them walk out. I watched the heavy glass door swing shut behind them. I watched Officer Davis follow them out into the parking lot to ensure they actually got into their car and left the property. The moment their taillights disappeared into the night traffic, a massive, profound weight physically lifted off my chest. I felt lighter than I had in 13 years. I turned around. The entire restaurant was staring at me in complete silence. "I apologize for the disruption, everyone," I announced loudly, projecting my voice across the room, pasting on my most professional, charming smile. "Please, enjoy your meals. The next round of drinks is entirely on the house." A low murmur of appreciation rippled through the dining room, and within seconds, the ambient noise of clinking silverware and conversation returned. The crisis was entirely averted. The cancer had been violently excised. I walked back into the hot, chaotic kitchen, tied my heavy canvas apron back on, and finished the dinner service. 6 weeks later, the intense dust had completely settled. Marcus was absolutely flawless in his execution. The corporate court in Dallas processed the incredibly dense paperwork without a single incident. The immediate lien against Julian's property in Pflugerville was officially filed and legally recorded in the public registry. Julian, absolutely terrified of federal prison and completely out of options, set up automatic bank transfers in late January. The monthly payments were substantial, slowly chipping away at the massive $200,000 principal, plus the strict 3% interest. It was the kind of grueling financial burden that would stretch across many years, forcing him to finally get a real job. He never called to argue. He never texted to complain. He simply paid. But my father, incapable of accepting complete defeat, made one final catastrophic mistake. About 3 weeks after the incident at Table 7, I received a secure, encrypted email from Thomas Sterling, my billionaire landlord. The subject line simply read, "Interesting phone call." Attached to the email was an audio recording. I clicked play. It was my father's voice, sounding incredibly arrogant and aggressive. He was frantically trying to convince Thomas that I was operating a highly illegal gambling ring out of the basement of the Ironwood, that I was drastically missing rent payments, and that Thomas needed to immediately revoke my commercial lease to protect his prestigious property value. Then, Thomas Sterling's booming, incredibly powerful voice came on the recording. "Richard," Thomas said, his voice dripping with absolute contempt and lethal power. "Liam pays his massive rent entirely in full 3 weeks early, every single month. His restaurant has significantly increased the overall property value of my entire commercial block. He is a brilliant, hard-working young man. You, on the other hand, are the exact same pathetic, cheating liar who tried to alter his scorecard on the 18th hole 15 years ago. I know exactly what you are trying to do, and if you ever try to threaten one of my top commercial tenants again, I will personally ensure that every single real estate developer, every bank, and every country club in this entire state permanently blacklists you. Do not ever contact me again." The recording clicked off. I sat in my office, laughing out loud. The sheer, beautiful irony of it was overwhelming. My father had desperately tried to use his non-existent power and fake connections to entirely destroy my life, and in doing so, he had violently detonated a nuclear bomb on his own reputation. True power in the business world didn't come from aggressive bullying. It came from profound respect, flawless competence, and treating people correctly. Thomas Sterling had just entirely wiped my father off the map. The restaurant experienced its absolute best financial quarter on record that following March. Without the constant, heavy psychological dread of my family hanging over my head, and without the grueling stress of fighting off their extortion attempts, my creative energy exploded. I designed an entirely new, highly innovative spring menu that caught the attention of a major national food critic. The glowing review was published in a major newspaper, and reservations at the Ironwood were completely booked out solid for the next 6 months. I hired 3 new talented line cooks, increased Sarah's salary significantly, and finally started taking Sundays off. Even the intense pressure from my rival across the street completely collapsed. Chef Victor, realizing his aggressive smear campaign had utterly failed to break my spirit or my business, eventually walked across the street one rainy afternoon. He didn't bring his intimidating prep cooks this time. He brought an expensive bottle of scotch and a massive slice of humble pie. We sat at the bar, and he formally apologized, admitting he was deeply terrified of my rapid success. We ended up discussing a potential collaborative charity dinner event. The war was officially over. One quiet Tuesday morning, exactly 2 months after the ambush, my personal cell phone buzzed on the kitchen prep counter. I glanced down at the bright screen. It was a text message from a blocked number, but the operating system still showed the preview. It was from my mother. It was a long, incredibly manipulative paragraph, carefully crafted to inflict maximum emotional damage. She talked extensively about the sacred bond of family, about how deeply heartbroken she was that I had turned into such a cold, calculating, and unforgiving monster, and how I had completely destroyed the beautiful family dynamic. She ended the text with 4 highly specific words designed to induce profound guilt. "I hope you're happy." I stared at the glowing screen for a very long time. I didn't feel a sudden spike of anxiety. I didn't feel the familiar, overwhelming urge to immediately defend my actions or angrily explain my side of the story. I just felt an incredibly deep, profound sense of pity for a woman who would die entirely alone because she couldn't stop viewing human beings as tools to be used. I didn't block the number immediately. First, I typed back exactly 2 words. I meant every single letter of them with my entire soul. I hit send. Then, I permanently blocked the number, deleted the entire text thread, and threw the phone onto the desk. I walked out of my office and stood in the center of the bustling, brightly lit kitchen. The prep cooks were laughing and joking loudly in Spanish while chopping massive piles of fresh vegetables. Sarah was up at the front host stand, cheerfully training a brand new hostess. Ben, my accountant, was sitting at a corner table, quietly working on his laptop while enjoying a complimentary espresso. I looked around at these people, these incredible, loyal, fiercely dedicated people who had stood by me when I was sleeping on an uncomfortable office sofa, fighting off vicious rumors, and terrified of losing my lease. They didn't share my DNA. We didn't grow up in the same house. But they protected me. They supported my vision. They never once tried to steal my success or minimize my trauma. I realized, with a profound sense of absolute clarity, that blood does not automatically make someone your family. DNA is just biology. It is completely random. True family is built entirely on mutual respect, unwavering loyalty, and shared struggles. True family does not exploit your vulnerabilities. They help you build armor to protect them. True family doesn't demand 15% of your life's work while holding a loaded gun to your head. I had spent my entire life frantically chasing the approval of people who were fundamentally incapable of offering it. I had let their toxic expectations define my worth. But not anymore. The heavy chains were completely broken. The debt was entirely paid in full. I was no longer the terrified, abandoned 19-year-old boy washing dishes and crying over a stolen identity. I was Liam. I was the chef and owner of the Ironwood. I was a man who had built an entire empire from absolutely nothing, and I would fiercely protect it against anyone, even the people who brought me into this world. My journey of profound healing didn't officially begin until I finally stopped trying to fix a family that was intentionally broken. It began the exact moment I realized my absolute worth was not tied to their horrific validation. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far. You're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to draw a massive, unforgiving boundary to protect your own peace and your own success? Share your incredibly brave story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey.